I built the company from nothing, only to be told over dinner that I'd be replaced by the CEO's 22-year-old daughter. I smiled and said I understood, but when her careless mistakes began to surface, she realized too late that erasing me wouldn't be so easy. I still remember the smell of rosemary chicken filling the elegant dining room that evening. I sat stiffly at the CEO's long mahogany table, crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier. I had been invited to his home countless times before, always as a trusted right hand, almost like family. But this time was different. His wife smiled politely, his son barely looked up from his phone, and then she entered, his 22-year-old daughter, dressed in a sharp white blazer that didn't quite fit her youth. She took her seat at the head of the table, next to her father, as if it had always belonged to her. Halfway through dinner, the CEO cleared his throat, his gaze not meeting mine. "Marilyn," he said softly, "we've made a decision. It's time to bring in fresh energy, a new vision. My daughter will be taking over your position." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. My position? The company I had built from scratch, the clients, the strategies, the sleepless nights, handed over like a gift to a girl who had never worked a day in her life. "Time to step aside and let the younger generation in," she chimed in sweetly, though her eyes glimmered with triumph. The room spun, but I forced a calm smile. "I completely understand," I replied, my voice steady. But inside, a storm raged. And as I set my glass back on the table, I already knew, I would not let them erase me so easily. She panicked when. The rest of the dinner was a blur of forced laughter and clinking glasses. I barely tasted the food on my plate. My mind was busy replaying the words over and over again: replaced, step aside, younger generation. I had always known this family could be ruthless in business, but I never thought they'd turn that same cruelty toward me. I wasn't just another employee. I was the one who had drawn up the company's first contracts, who had spent nights at the office when their father was too tired to go on. I had defended the company's reputation when investors doubted us. And now, I was being discarded like an outdated manual. Her smugness was what stung most. She leaned toward me at one point, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Don't worry, Marilyn. You've done your part. I'll take it from here." Her confidence wasn't earned, it was borrowed, stolen from the weight of her father's name. She had no idea what real responsibility felt like. I excused myself early, blaming a headache, though my chest felt tight with something far sharper. As I walked to my car, the night air hit me like a slap. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the mansion's glowing windows. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, but I wasn't broken. No, something inside me was awakening. The next morning at the office, whispers had already started. I could see it in the way people looked at me, eyes darting away quickly, pity mixing with curiosity. One young associate approached timidly. "Marilyn, is it true? About her taking your place?" I didn't answer. Instead, I offered a small smile and went into my office, closing the door behind me. It was still my office. For now. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Years of carefully organized projects, confidential emails, sensitive reports, everything was right there. All the strings of the company ran through me, whether they wanted to admit it or not. And as my fingers hovered over the keyboard, an idea began to form. I wouldn't beg for recognition. I wouldn't scream or fight. No, my revenge would be quiet, deliberate, and invisible until it was too late. I whispered to myself, if they want to see what happens when they take me for granted, they'll get their lesson. That evening, I sent my resignation letter, polite, professional, wrapped in gratitude. But what I didn't include was the fact that I had already taken the first step toward a plan that would leave their precious daughter trembling. She panicked when I walked out of the office with the polite resignation letter folded inside my bag like a loaded card. I let the receptionist see me sign out, let the rumor mill do its quiet work. People love a spectacle, especially one with someone stepping down. I wanted them to think they'd won. That night I didn't go home. The city felt different after sunset, smaller somehow, leaving room for plans that daylight would have smothered. I drove to a diner I used to haunt when the company was just a two-room operation and a trembling hope. The waitress remembered me, no surprise, she'd been one of my first clients, and poured me coffee without asking. I sat in a corner booth and called 3 people, a longtime client who owed me loyalty like a favor, an old contractor who never billed me extra, and a lawyer I'd taken a chance on years ago when the company first teetered. I didn't announce a war. I spoke in halves, in questions that nudged them toward conclusions. Have you thought about the upcoming renewal? Who's handling it on their side? Would you prefer continuity or a new team that's learning on the fly? If there were any confusion about authority, would you want that clarified in writing? Small prompts, harmless, reasonable, that planted seeds. They responded in the way people do when they're worried about money or reputation, quickly, quietly, and with a need to be reassured. One client asked if I'd be available for a consult during the transition. I said yes. The contractor offered to hold off on a major rollout until they were sure the new leadership had internal approval. The lawyer said she'd review a few documents if I forwarded them. Back at the office during daylight hours, I smiled and carried on. I attended the transition meeting the CEO organized as if I were already on my way out the door. I listened to his daughter give her canned spiel about innovation and fresh approaches. She clicked through a slide deck that glittered with buzzwords: disruption, influencer alignment, agile. My colleagues applauded politely. I clapped too, because I knew applause meant nothing until the numbers lined up. Privately, I began to move threads. I duplicated important contracts and set up a private, encrypted folder, a digital little black box of everything that kept the company running. I cataloged the relationships I'd nurtured, vendors, clients, little eccentricities that made them stay. I wrote memos not for the board, but for myself, clear, factual accounts of decisions, dates, and promises. I scheduled calls with 2 key investors under the guise of checking in, and I replayed, gently, the risks of a leader with a title but no track record. I also watched her. The daughter moved through the office like a girl who had been handed a map and assumed it matched the terrain. Her first week was a performance, meetings staged for cameras, rehearsed smiles. She asked naive questions aloud in conference rooms and laughed loudly at jokes that landed flat. One afternoon she approved a high-profile partnership on the spot, a media collaboration that promised big exposure but required upfront commitments and creative control. I made a mental note and an actual one in my folder. Quiet vengeance is patient. It doesn't rely on drama. It relies on alignment, on evidence, timing, and people who will do the right thing when presented with facts, not fury. I began assembling those facts: the unauthorized agreement she'd signed, the misread clause in the vendor contract, the careless promises to clients without consulting operations. Small errors, each one fixable, together they formed a pattern. I set the next piece into motion with an email that looked routine, a scheduling note for a quarterly investor update. I added one line: please bring any outstanding vendor or partnership documents for review. It sounded ordinary. It sounded necessary. What it also did was force transparency onto the table. She panicked when The quarterly investor update was usually a formality: coffee, charts, predictable optimism. I knew the rhythm, I had orchestrated dozens of them myself. That morning, I arrived earlier than usual, just to see her pacing in the conference room, clutching a stack of papers like a student about to give a final presentation. Her cheeks were flushed, and her confidence looked thinner under fluorescent lights. "Morning," I said softly, letting my tone carry the faintest note of support. She needed me to look harmless. Investors filed in, shaking hands, offering small talk about traffic and market trends. The CEO looked tired, though he still tried to project strength. He glanced at me once, then away quickly, as though guilty. When the meeting began, his daughter launched into her presentation. It was glossy, polished, full of catchphrases that sounded impressive but meant little. A few heads nodded politely. Others looked at their watches. Then came the moment I had prepared for. One of the investors, an older gentleman who had been with us from the beginning, cleared his throat. Before we continue, I'd like to review the vendor and partnership documents, as Marilyn suggested. The room went still. She froze for just a second, just long enough for me to catch the flicker of panic in her eyes. Of course, she said, shuffling her stack nervously. She handed them out, smiling too brightly. As pages rustled, silence fell heavier. The errors leapt off the paper like ink stains. Unapproved spending, clauses granting the partner far more control than was standard, vague terms that left the company financially exposed. I watched faces tighten, lips press thin. "Who signed this?" one investor asked. She swallowed. I did. It was an opportunity we couldn't pass up." Murmurs spread around the table. The CEO shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew. He had to know by now. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Another investor, a sharp woman who rarely spoke unless it mattered, leaned forward. "This partnership leaves us vulnerable. Who reviewed the terms before this was approved?" I was going to have legal look it over," the daughter stammered. "But it was time-sensitive." "Time-sensitive mistakes can cost millions," the older gentleman cut her off. I kept my eyes lowered, pen poised over my notebook, as though I were only a secretary taking minutes. Inside, though, a calm satisfaction spread through me. By the end of the meeting, investors were demanding revisions, oversight, and a formal review process. Her glossy presentation was forgotten. The CEO's face had gone pale, his jaw tight. He didn't even glance at me this time. When it was finally over, I packed my things quietly. As I stood, I caught her staring at me across the room. Her smile was gone, replaced by something raw, fear mixed with recognition. She had underestimated me. And she was only just beginning to realize what that meant. She panicked when That night, I sat by my kitchen window, a cup of tea cooling in my hands, and replayed the expressions on their faces. Investors didn't raise their voices, but their silence afterward had been louder than shouting. The CEO's daughter left the building clutching her papers like a shield, her heels clicking unevenly on the marble floor. She hadn't looked back. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was steadiness. Revenge, I was learning, wasn't a single strike. It was a rhythm, subtle, deliberate, and patient. One step revealed the cracks, the next would let the whole structure tremble. The following morning, she tried to recover. She marched into the office in a crimson blazer, her smile plastered on, as though the color alone could signal authority. "New week, new start," she chirped to the team. But the tone in the room had shifted. People who once nodded eagerly now exchanged glances before answering her. Confidence in leadership is fragile. Once it's doubted, it rarely recovers. I didn't confront her. Instead, I withdrew just enough. When she asked me for insight on a vendor, I replied, "You'll figure it out." When she requested a rundown of a client's history, I smiled, "The files should all be there." My absence was louder than my presence. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed quietly with messages. A client wanted to know if I was still available independently. Another asked if I could clarify a few things off the record. I didn't solicit, doors simply opened once people realized who truly understood the company's backbone. Later that week, an investor emailed me directly. "We'd like your opinion on the new partnership strategy. Confidentially." I typed my response slowly, carefully, never bitter, always factual. Numbers, risks, overlooked clauses. When presented clearly, the truth speaks louder than outrage. By Friday, whispers had turned into murmurs. "She doesn't have the experience." "Did you see the investor's reaction?" Marilyn always knew how to steady things. I didn't need to spread rumors. Reality was doing it for me. And then, just before I left for the weekend, I received an unexpected call from a journalist. They had caught wind of the flashy new partnership deal and wanted background. My name had been suggested as someone who might provide context. I agreed to meet, already knowing this was the turning point. She panicked when The journalist chose a quiet cafe tucked between office towers, neutral ground, far from the gleaming headquarters where everything looked untouchable from the outside. I arrived early, sitting near the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. My nerves hummed, but not with fear. It was anticipation. She entered 5 minutes late, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a notepad already open in her hand. "Marilyn, thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth. I offered her a polite smile. "I'm no longer with the company," I reminded her. "I don't know how much help I can be." She tilted her head knowingly. "That's why you can help me." Off the record at first, context, history. I've been hearing things about the new leadership, particularly a partnership deal that's raising eyebrows. What can you tell me? I didn't hand her everything. Not yet. Instead, I spoke in careful brushstrokes. The company was built on trust with its clients. Decisions were never rushed, and every contract was reviewed twice before approval. Recently, shortcuts have been taken. Deals signed before legal review. Promises made without operational backing. She scribbled notes furiously. And who's responsible for these changes? I lifted my cup of coffee, letting the pause linger. Leadership shifted to someone without prior business experience. Ambition without discipline can be costly. Her eyes gleamed. She had her angle. Would you be willing to point me toward documentation? Anything concrete? I leaned closer, lowering my voice. If I provide you with information, it will be because the truth deserves to be seen, not because of personal bitterness. Understood? She nodded quickly. Understood. We parted after an hour, and I left her with just enough, a breadcrumb trail of contracts and timelines she could request from public records, plus a hint at which vendors might be willing to speak off the record. Nothing directly from me yet, but plenty to light her path. Back at home, I felt the first wave of consequence beginning to crest. I didn't have to push. The machine was moving on its own now. That weekend, the story broke online: new leadership at rising firm stumbles with risky partnership. The headline wasn't explosive, but the article was detailed enough to shake confidence. Investors read it. Clients read it. And by Monday morning, the office was buzzing with speculation. When I walked in to collect the last of my things, I saw her standing outside the CEO's office, phone pressed to her ear, her face pale. She was speaking too loudly, trying to sound in control. "It's fine, it's just a misunderstanding. I'll fix it." But her free hand twisted nervously at her necklace. Our eyes met across the hall. For the first time, I saw uncertainty there. Not arrogance. Not triumph. Fear. I gave her a polite nod, as though nothing had happened. Later that day, I received a call from one of the oldest clients. "Marilyn," he said, voice low, "we want to move our account. Are you open to consulting independently?" I looked at the folder on my desk, the one with all the names, the history, the lifeblood of the company they had tried to strip from me. My fingers brushed over the cover, and I allowed myself a small smile. "Yes," I said. "I'm open." She panicked when The first consulting contract landed on my desk within days. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was steady, enough to remind me that my worth had never lived inside their glass offices. Word spread quietly. A second client called, then a third. They didn't care about shiny slogans or youth, they wanted reliability, and they remembered who had carried them through storms before. Meanwhile, the CEO's daughter was scrambling. News of the article hadn't faded. Instead, it lingered like a bruise, mentioned in meetings, whispered in hallways. I didn't have to be there to know it was haunting her. One evening, while gathering the last of my files from my old office, I overheard her behind closed doors. Her voice cracked through the thin wall. "Dad, you promised me this would work." "I can't. I don't know how to fix it. The investors are doubting me." His reply was muffled, weary. You have to prove yourself, Emily. They won't respect you until you do. I froze in the hallway, her words echoing in my mind. She doesn't know how to fix it. That was the truth in its rawest form. I could have walked away, let her sink under the weight of her own arrogance. But something in me wanted her to see exactly what she had underestimated. Quiet revenge wasn't only about survival, it was about recognition. So I made sure she saw my name. On contracts. On consulting proposals. On the lips of clients she had assumed were hers. The next time our paths crossed, it was at a charity gala the company was sponsoring. I had been invited by one of my new clients, who insisted I attend as their guest. I arrived in a simple black dress, nothing ostentatious, but enough to blend seamlessly among the donors and executives. She spotted me almost immediately. Her smile faltered mid-sentence with a group of partners. I raised my glass in a calm salute, as if to say, still here. Still standing. Later that evening, a board member approached me privately. Marilyn, I hear you've started consulting. If you're taking on more clients, I'd like to discuss an opportunity. I agreed with a steady smile, fully aware she had seen the exchange from across the room. Her panic wasn't loud. It was in the way she tightened her grip on her champagne flute, the way her eyes darted, calculating. She was realizing what I had known all along, replacing me on paper didn't erase me in reality. And that realization was only the beginning. She panicked when By the following week, my calendar was filling faster than hers ever could. Clients who had once filled the company's ledger were now calling me directly. Some asked for consulting, others for long-term contracts. I didn't solicit a single one, they came of their own accord, because they trusted me, not the name on the building. The CEO's daughter tried to regain ground. She posted polished photos online, standing in front of branded backdrops, shaking hands, smiling with hollow confidence. But behind the shine, cracks widened. The flashy partnership she'd signed was unraveling, the vendor threatened penalties for missed deadlines. Investors demanded stricter oversight. I didn't need to push. I simply waited. Then, one afternoon, I received an unexpected message. It was from the CEO himself. Short. Formal. Marilyn, I'd like to speak with you. Privately. I read it twice, my lips curling into a wry smile. The man who had once allowed me to be dismissed without hesitation was now reaching out, because the empire I had built was slipping through his daughter's fingers. When we met in his office, I noticed how much older he looked. The confident posture was gone, replaced by sagging shoulders. Marilyn, he began, you know how much the company owes to you. We'd like to explore how you might continue to contribute. As an advisor, perhaps. A steadying voice. I listened quietly, hands folded in my lap. At last, I said, I thought it was time to let the younger generation in. He winced. She's learning. But the investors, they're restless. They trust you. I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. For the first time, he looked truly uncomfortable. I wasn't interested in revenge through shouting or bitterness. My power lay in restraint. So I stood, smoothing my jacket. I'll consider it. But only on my terms. As I left his office, I caught a glimpse of her down the hall. She stood rigid, her eyes wide as she realized her father had summoned me, not her. The panic was clear now, no longer hidden behind rehearsed smiles. She panicked when Her panic reached its peak the following week. Investors scheduled an emergency meeting, and though I was no longer officially part of the company, my name was on the agenda, as a potential advisor. She tried to mask it with confidence, but her voice wavered as she presented updates. Charts with slipping numbers, vague reassurances about strategic pivots. Then, when the floor opened, one investor asked plainly, "What does Marilyn think?" Every head turned toward me. I hadn't planned to speak, but the moment was too perfect. I leaned forward, my tone calm but firm. The company has strength. But leadership requires patience and discipline, not rushed deals and untested risks. Stability is what clients value most. The room hummed with agreement. She sat frozen, her knuckles white around her pen. Afterward, I passed her in the hallway. She stopped me, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this? You said you understood." I met her gaze evenly. "I did. I understood that you wanted to erase me. Now you understand that some things can't be erased." She had no reply, only silence, the kind that comes when someone realizes their crown is made of paper. She panicked when In the end, I didn't need to raise my voice or claim revenge openly, the board did it for me. Within a month, she was quietly moved into a training role, stripped of real authority but dressed up with a title so her pride could survive. Investors insisted on an advisor to guide the company, and their choice was unanimous: me. I returned, not as an employee bound by their rules, but as a consultant on my own terms. I set my hours, chose my projects, and answered only to myself. The staff greeted me with relieved smiles, clients came back with trust in their eyes. She avoided me in the halls. When our paths crossed, she looked down, her earlier arrogance replaced by something rawer, respect laced with fear. She finally understood that leadership isn't inherited, it's earned. And as for me? I had no need to gloat. My victory was quieter, deeper. I had built the company once, and when they tried to erase me, I built a stronger version of myself instead. Revenge didn't come in shouts or spectacle. It came in calm persistence, in patience, in the simple act of standing steady while their house of cards collapsed. And when I finally walked out of that building each evening, the cool air on my face, I felt lighter than I had in years, because the truest revenge was not in taking back what they stole, but in proving I had never needed their permission to begin with.